Blizzard have done it. There are finally some more God Comp nerfs. It feels like it's been too long. I really think they needed to do this sooner, and I'm not even sure if they've gone far enough. I am a little bit disappointed. Well, I'm more than a little bit disappointed. I am very disappointed right now because of a certain reason that we'll get onto towards the end of this video. But yeah, as a competitive player, I think the season's pretty much over. I don't see how anyone who's going for the title now would want to continue trying to push the title until there's some major balancing changes either to dungeons or to other specs, because it's just the best comp has been nerfed twice now in a row. I think that in general there's maybe 2 key levels that have been taken off the top from the nerfs, but there's been no compensatory buffs. We'll get into this a little bit more later in the video. Let's just do a react to the changes then. First up, we have Unholy DK. These are some good changes. So epidemic damage is increased by 8%, bursting souls damage is increased by 12%. This is a bit compensatory from where Unholy was in for Season 1. They were doing a lot more damage, then had some changes coming out of Season 2. This is a bit of a compensation I would see to that. The big issue with this, and the big issue with Unholy, is still the fact that the talent tree does not allow you to take your single target damage whilst also taking your AoE, and you do 95% of a single target whilst doing 95% of your AoE. You essentially can't do that. If you want to go all the way down the gargoyle side, you lose out on a lot of AoE. A really good example of this, something that I've just started playing, Enhancement Shaman. Your Elementalist build, to go from your single target to your AoE build, you change 2 talent points. You do lose quite a bit of single target, 5, 10%, something like that, but then you gain all of your AoE, and you're just doing all of your AoE whilst in your single target build. Unholy is not a good example of that, and I think in future, specs need to be able to do that. So what they need to do with Unholy is rework the talent tree, not necessarily just buff damage. I think until it gets that rework, it's never going to be S tier in Mythic Plus. It still might have a niche and say MDI, where you just need that ridiculously high uncapped damage, but for now at least I don't think this is going to be enough. It's obviously nice if you're an Unholy DK player. I'm not sure, like I said, it's going to be enough to break the meta at all. It needs more, and it needs a rework in future, in my opinion. Next up then we have Guardian Druid. These changes aren't enough in my opinion to make it well, let's talk about the changes first. So thrash damage reduced by 8%, raise damage reduced by 8%. This is obviously affecting both damage and also sustainability tankiness, because based on your damage, you are healing / you are more tanky. But I don't think this is enough, basically. It closes the gap a bit to, say, Vengeance Demon Hunter, maybe Blood DK. But I still think Guardian is going to be the tankiest spec based on my current understanding of how the spec is working. So I don't think this is going to be enough to push Guardian out of that S spot, but it is going to close the gap a little bit. And we may see more Vengeance Demon Hunters after these changes. Next up, we have Augmentation Evoker. The second part of the God Comp is receiving nerfs. Let's talk about the notes here. Augmentation is adding a significant amount of damage to their party whilst also providing strong utility and survivability. For this week, we'd like to reduce some of the damage contributions from the buffs to help bring them more in line with other classes. I don't think that Blizzard understand what the problem is, which is really worrying. Augmentation is good. It does decent damage. It's not mage level of damage. I would say there are specs out there that do similar amounts of damage. You could bring a Enhancement Shaman right now, I would have said, maybe a Boomkin, right? And they would do a similar amount of damage that you get from Augmentation out of the raw damage numbers. The issue with the spec is that you just give main stats to the tank and the healer, as well as bring Scales, Zephyr. You have Twin Guard. The amount of survivability and utility. You have 4 AoE stops, which is just ridiculous. AoE, it's just insane, the package that Augmentation brings. And it's not necessarily damage at all. They need to make it so that tanks and healers are not affected by Ebb and Might. That would solve the issues. You could give them compensatory buffs to damage if you wanted to keep them at 95%, 100% of what a damage dealer would normally do if you really want this. But these nerfs overall, so we'll talk about it now, but Breath of Eons accumulates 10% of damage done instead of 15%. Fate Mirror has a chance to proc has been reduced to 10%, was 15%. It's about a 5% overall from what I've looked at in logs. 5% overall nerf to damage. It was needed again, just to allow that space. But I think that in reality, They have to make it so that Ebonite does not affect tanks and healers. It's as simple as that, and then it will remove this niche that it has in Mythic Plus of having to be a one-off, because it increases the amount of healing that the healer's doing and how tanky the tank is. That alone is just worth a key level. They have to remove that aspect of augmentation, or else it's going to be a one-off for the eternity of time, in my opinion. If it's doing 95% of a normal damage dealer's damage, it's going to be a one-off in every single comp. So they have to change that. There is no way they can let augmentation continue in its current state. And that is me, Flavor of the Month, rolling onto an augmentation evoker. I'm not saying it because I'm salty that augmentation's good. I'm saying it because you cannot allow augmentation in its current state to continue. You maybe could have released 5 or 6 support specs in the future, of which all do the same thing and increase the party size to 6. That might have been okay, but in its current state, it is not okay at all. And it needs some serious reworks and some serious changes to the way that it's working to just enable this season to continue, because I think it's just completely broken at the minute. Next up, then we have Marksmanship Hunter, which has received some more buffs on top of some buffs from last week, so you've got to keep that in mind. Multi-shot damage increased by 8%, explosive shot 10%, trick shots has gone from 65 to 70. These are good, they're good changes, but again, it's not helping the single target and AoE aspects of marksmanship simultaneously. It's not going to be meta breaking. Be happy if you're a Marksmanship Hunter, this is obviously good, but I think it just needs some serious changes, or just buff it single target. I don't think anyone cares about raid right now. We're so far into the season. Let more players get cutting edge. That's a good thing. Just give them aura buffs of like 10-15%, in my opinion. Like that would help solve the current situation that we have in Mythic Plus. But I mean, that's just my opinion. Be happy for Marksmanship Hunter, but it's not meta breaking. I don't think this is enough to completely break the meta. Mage has been hit pretty hard here. So Fire Mage, basically all AoE aspects, so Flame Strike, Flame Patch, Conflag, Meteor, Phoenix Flames, Living Bomb has been reduced by 10%. So your AoE damage has been nerfed by 10% pretty much across the board. I don't know, in keys this is going to be something like a 5%, 6% nerf overall, I would have said again. So Augmentation 5%, Fire Mage 5%, maybe more for Fire Mage. These are some pretty substantial nerfs, but it's not like Fire Mage has been completely nuked off the face of the earth. Fire Mage is probably still going to be the DPS in that spot. I mean, if we just look at the God comp in totality, in terms of all of this, right, so you've got Druid, so you don't want another Druid in the comp because Guardian is so good. You have Paladin, so you don't want another Paladin in the comp because Paladin is so good in the healing spot, right? You then need a priest. You have to have a priest in these keys. Mind Soothe allows skips that you can't do otherwise, right? It allows so many skips that you can't do. As a subtlety rogue, I still needed a priest in the comp to do a lot of skips because you needed Soothe. Okay, so priest is coming, not just Mind Soothe, by the way. Master Spell, let's just look at Halls of Infusion. You need Mind Soothe and Master Spell to be able to get past some packs and deal with some boss mechanics. It's just mandatory. There are 4 keys where I would say priest is mandatory. That means you bring it to every single key, because if the top comp is playing with the same composition every single time, then you're bringing priest to every single key. Because Paladin is so good, I mean, there are some nerfs that we'll talk about in a second, and maybe it opens up space for priest to slot into the healing spot, but because Paladin is so good, Holy Paladin, you cannot bring a healing priest spec, either disc or holy, right? Which means that you need it in the DPS spot. So that's one of the DPS spots taken. Augmentation gives you a key level easily, just in terms of the healing and tankiness that it gives to the healer and tank. That is nailed on again because of the prerequisites that we just talked about. That means you want a spec that uses PI well and isn't one of the aforementioned specs. Okay, so you can't fit in, I'm just off the top of my head, another Druid, so you don't want to put Boomkin in there. The overlapping utility would be too much. You don't want to put Ret in there because the overlapping utility would be too much, right? What have we got left then? What likes PI? Fits this sort of bursty composition where you've got these really high peaks. DK and Warlock, the only 2 real specs that I would potentially put in here. Maybe Destruction could slot in after these nerfs, but I don't think these nerfs are enough to allow Destruction Warlock to overtake Mage, so I'm just left in this position where the God comp is probably still going to be around. The nerfs aren't enough because the other specs haven't been buffed. You've just removed, let's say, 5-6% off Mage, 5% off Augmentation, right? not 8%, but let's say another sort of 4 or 5% off Guardian Druid. It's not enough when other specs aren't getting buffed. You're buffing these really out of the meta specs, let's say, then they're nowhere near being close to meta. But why aren't we buffing these specs that are sort of close to being meta? These B tier specs, I don't understand it. Frost Mage changes anyway. Comet Storm decreased by 6%, Blizzard 8%, Frozen Orb 8%. They're obviously worried that these Fire Mage nerfs will just mean that Frost Mage is played. That probably would have been the case without these changes, but like I said, it's still not going to be enough. Holy Paladin, all healing reduced by 5%. Light's Protection reduces damage taken by 10%, was 16. Overflow Light now creates an absorb of 30% of Glimmer's overhealing, was 50. Tears Deliverance now increases the intake from Holy Light, Flash of Light, Holy Shock by 15%, was 25. Blessing of Summer reduced to 20%, was 30. Fading Lamp now creates an absorb shield of 3%. The healing of damage done from Holy Power Generators was 10%. Righteous Judgment now causes 30% to activate Consecration, was 50%. Consecration damage reduced by 25%. In totality, I mean, just looking at this, it's got to be at least 10% to your healing and Mythic Plus. And then there's all of those like sustainability changes to like damage taken. You've then got reduced damage from Holy Paladin now. That's like a 10% nerf to Summer. Most of your damage comes from Summer. It's crazy to see this level of changes on what was already a 12% healing throughput nerf, was it? I can't remember, was it 9%? But we've seen compounding nerfs from Holy. If you played Holy Paladin week 1, you just had 20+% more healing than what you have right now. That's 2 key levels by itself. 2 key levels by itself. That is ridiculous that they've had to do this. And then the compensatory buffs to other specs, like I said, just aren't there. So it's just that the season's over. Retribution Paladin, Divine Storm increased by 8%, Wake of Ashes by 10, Consecration by 12. Be happy, Rets. They were already good in the previous season. Sorry, it wasn't the previous, that's a Freudian slip. They were already good in the previous half patch, so at the start of this season. So these are really nice changes to see. I'd be very, very happy if I was Ret. I don't know if Ret would come back into the meta if you just say like deleted the God comp. Potentially it would. You might end up in a position where you have, say, like Priest in the healer spot, and then you bring a Paladin because of its utility and damage again into one of the DPS spots. I'm not entirely sure. It probably was good enough, so that's okay. But I don't think Ret's issue was its AoE again. I think it's its single target. I think it needed more help in terms of single target whilst in its AoE spec. So sort of surprising to see. Similar to Marksman, I want to see buffs to like both sides, really. But yeah, nice if you're a retry, be happy about this. I don't think it's going to make you meta again. I'm not entirely sold on the fact that this is going to solve the meta. Priest then. We're seeing a lot of changes here to Shadow, but we'll go through the Discipline Holy first. Vampiric Embrace now heals a nearby ally for 40% of single targets instead of 50%. That's pretty big. That's quite a big change, but it's still a very good spell. So Lane now reduces the cooldown of Vampiric Embrace by 30 seconds, was 45. Again, some changes to its utility here, but this isn't the utility that they think it is that is the reason why you bring Shadow Priest. The reason why you bring Shadow Priest is Master Spell, Mind Soothe, and Mind Control. It has nothing to do with Vampiric. Obviously, Vampiric Embrace is good, but this isn't the reason why we need a comp that includes Priest. It's not the reason. And again, a lot of this just screams that Blizzard don't understand the issues with the comp at the minute and why certain specs are good. So, sure, Shadow Priest needed some more nerfs, but I don't see how the spec is not going to be brought unless they make it so, say, Master Spell is only accessible to Holy and Disc, for example. That would be the only way. You need a Priest, and unless you can fit Holy Priest or Disc Priest in at the healer spot, it's going to be Shadow. That's basically it. That's the crux of the issue right now. Discipline is getting 40% instead of 36% healing through Atonement now. That's quite a big change. I'd be very happy if I was a Disc Priest, but I don't think Disc is anywhere near the throughput of Holy Paladin in 5-man content right now, so this isn't going to be enough. They needed other changes as well, in my opinion, but again, it's in the right direction, so I'd be happy if I was a Disc Priest player for sure. Rhapsody now stacks every 1 second, was 2, and causes Holy Nova to deal 20% increased damage per stack, was 10%. That's a really big change. like a lot of your AoE damage from Holy comes from this talent point by itself, so that's a huge change. I'm not entirely certain which spec you would play in 5-man content. I think last season it was Holy, if I remember correctly. At the end of the season, there was a Holy Priest that was pushing. I think I'm correct in saying that. And I'm assuming that it would be the same again, that you might default to Holy Priest if a Priest was going to fit into this comp. Yeah, I think. So this is a nice change to see. It is. But again, I don't know if it's enough in terms of healing throughput to close that gap to Paladin. Paladin's obviously just been nerfed a lot. Maybe we just have completely changed the meta comp, and now Holy Priest slots in, and then you can get a new DPS into the Shadow Priest spot. That is a potential, but I don't think these changes are enough from what I understand. In my opinion, Holy/Disc need more 5-man healing changes to bring it back up to where Holy Paladin currently is. Still nice to see, but there needs to be way more compensation again, in my opinion, just in terms of other specs. Other healing specs need way more help right now to bring them back up to where Holy Paladin currently is. Shadow Priest, Vampiric Touch damage reduced by 20%, Shadowward Pain by 15%, Shadowy Apparition damage by 15%, and then healing is no longer reduced by 20%. That's just a PvP change, so we don't care about it. This has got to be like another, 5% nerf to Shadow Priest, I would assume. Something like that. On 8 targets, it might even be more than that, like just constant AoE damage. I think overall in keys, it'll be like 4 or 5% again. So every single one of the DPS specs in the God comp nerfed by 5%, healing by at least 10% in my opinion, plus the damage nerfs to Holy Paladin, maybe 5% damage on to Guardian Druid as well. This is just another key level off the top. Let's finish up with the other changes. So Outlaw, getting 5% increase overall. It's doing, well, they split it out into ability and auto attack damage, but essentially everything has been increased by 5%. It needs more than that, in my opinion, to close the gap to Subtlety still. It's still nowhere near sub. Warrior, Ravage damage increased by 8%, Thunder Sword damage increased by 8%. That's really good. That's a lot of your AoE damage. And then Fury specifically is getting whirlwind increases the next single target damage ability by 50% up from 50, 55% up from 50. Again, a nice change for Fury. OMS and Fury, well, Fury and OMS, I should say Fury was the favoured, but they were good before the God comp got released, so that's really good to see. Again, similar to Ret Paladin, if this God comp just dissolves and gets deleted, then I think you'd be very, very happy to see this, but yeah, in its current state, I don't think Warrior is going to overtake either Augmentation Evoker or Shadow Priest or Fire Mage, in my opinion. It's just not going to slot into any of those spots. It has to be someone that likes PI currently, in my opinion. But yeah, let's talk about this in totality. So if you played for the 0.1% title, okay, like myself, and you had the God comp prepped for 10.1.5, you were given, from the current state, so from next week, you were given at least 2 key levels, in my opinion, maybe more, maybe 3 key levels for free when Fire Mage was completely broken, when Holy Paladin was completely broken. That is not okay for us to end up in a position where the season is now dead. The season is just dead in the water. You cannot push the same key levels, which you could before. The entire God comp has been nerfed, and I don't even know if this is going to be enough to dissolve the God comp, like I've just said. It's probably not, in my opinion, because of the utility aspects that I've talked about time and time again, and Blizzard seem to be misunderstanding the problem. Other specs need some serious buffs, or augmentation needs to be completely reworked, and also we need to somehow get buffs into the pre-spec so that they can slot into the healing role. Yeah, I don't see how this is going to change that much. You might see more, say, enhancement shamans, or maybe a warlock where the Fire Mage is, potentially with these changes. I still don't think Fire Mage has received enough of a nerf. The other specs need buffs. That's all that they need to do. I at the moment, though, just my motivation to play World of Warcraft is pretty low. I like playing Augmentation Evoker, which I've just main swapped onto. But I don't know what it is. Like, theoretically speaking, in a vacuum, this expansion is incredibly good. It's one of the best expansions we've ever had. Season 1 tuning of both dungeons and specs, I think, was very, very good at the end of the season, and I thoroughly enjoyed playing Mythic Plus. Right now, I don't know whether it's because I don't like the dungeon pool or because of the dungeon balancing, but I'm just not that. I'm no longer... I don't care about pushing as much, and now the fact that the title push is over, we've missed the window to push in a title, basically, as a team. We didn't have the specs prepped in time. Our first week of pushing was last week. We got 26s and 3 or 4 27s done across the board. So I got some good IO, but if I'd had everything prepped before and we played with Fire Mage, I would have had at least +1 key level on that. So I would have had 28s and 27s across the board, maybe even 29s if we'd already had everything prepped, because I also potentially would have been more used to playing Evoker, for example. Others would have been more used to playing their comp, their part of the God comp. But instead, I'm in this position where we've had 1 week of pushing before the final set of nerfs have come in. We already nerfed whilst we were pushing. It's just, I don't care anymore about Mythic Plus if I'm not going to be able to get the 0.1% title. Like, I am a very competitive person and I like pushing. And to me, a lot of it comes from that sort of reward of being, 0.1%. I really want to do that. So yeah, my motivation to play this game is now at an all-time low, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are the same. The 0.1% competition is just over now. I'll still play Mythic Plus, I'll still play the game, but I just, I don't care at all for Mythic Plus right now, and it's just, this isn't the nail in the coffin. They have been piling on far too many changes to Mythic Plus at this point in the season, which they just didn't. They should have completely. They should have been very guarded with how they released these reworked specs, and they needed to release them at B tier and buff them up to S. If you wanted Holy Paladin to be S tier, if you wanted Fire Mage to be S tier, if you wanted Augmentation to be S tier, you have to buff them up to that position where they're only just S tier. You do not do what you do, where you release everything 20% better than everything else and just give everyone a free 2-3 key levels on top of what they already had. It's ridiculous. And like I said, I think Blizzard's completely out of touch as to why this God comp has formed. I think they really need to have some serious changes within their balancing team to have a look at this in the future, and see why this has happened and learn lessons from it. Because, like I said, it's ruined Mythic Plus this season for me entirely. If they don't, with 10.1.7, add a completely broken item and or nerf dungeons across the board whilst buffing every other single spec in the game that isn't part of the God comp, I don't think I'm going to get the 0.1% title this season. I'm just not fussed. Well, I'll play with my team if they really want to. I'll have to have a conversation with them, but I don't want to break my back trying to get into 0.1% when the people that had stuff prepped just gained 2 free key levels. It just feels it's an unfair race, basically. And yeah, I'm over it. I'm basically over it. So I will just live without the 0.1% title this season. Anyway, with that very cheery end to this video and this reaction to tuning, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. As always, I want to give a big shout out to my few patrons. Honestly, you mean a lot to me. I always say this, but it's huge having a few patrons and the support from you guys. So I really do appreciate you. If you'd also like to potentially support me beyond a thumbs up and a subscribe, you could head on over to Patreon and check out what I offer in return. As always, hopefully you've enjoyed this one. If you have done, we will see you guys in the next one. Peace.